I've read every story from FNAF Tales from the PIZZAPLEX. I've listened to every story from FNAF Tales from the PIZZAPLEX. And believe it or not, they're not that bad. There's actually a good handful of these stories that I really enjoyed. And so totally not to justify all of these purchases as a tax write-off, we're gonna be going over every single story presented in Tales from the PIZZAPLEX. Some stories I'll be going into more detail over others. It really just depends on how much I enjoyed it and how much critiques or criticism I have of it. I will say that before we begin, there weren't any stories that I necessarily absolutely hated or anything. At the very least, they were alright. If anything, it was really interesting to see Scott Cawthon's take on the PIZZAPLEX, considering that Steelwool were the ones really in creative control when it came to the PIZZAPLEX's overall design. You could definitely tell that Scott Cawthon added his own little Scott Cawthon-y weirdness that only he can add to this franchise. You know things can get weird when you have a giant fucking robot tree in the middle of your huge-ass pizza-shaped mall. Anyways, enough horsing around. We have a lot of shit to get through, so let's start going through the shit. Starting off with number 25, by far the worst story in Tales from the PIZZAPLEX, in my opinion at least, is B7. Now, of course, feel free to have your own opinion on this. In fact, I know one of the viewers to my channel actually really enjoyed this story. Looking at you, Dr. Butthugger. But my favorite part of these stories have always been their connection to the FNAF lore and characters. And this one has absolutely jack shit to do with Freddy's. In fact, while doing this ranking, I'm gonna point out and take off points for any story that actively doesn't involve or mention the PIZZAPLEX. After all, this series is called Tales from the PIZZAPLEX for a reason. If your story does not mention or feature the PIZZAPLEX at all, of course with one very specific exception, what are you doing in a book series about the PIZZAPLEX? This story being the first of which in our list to not included. We do get a little mention in the very beginning of Freddy and Friends, which is cool to see a little Easter egg back to FNAF 4, but other than that, there is nothing going on here that is FNAF related. One day, little Billy decides, I wanna be a robot, and so he dedicates the rest of his life to being a robot, in the process ruining his family relationships and life. He keeps physically altering his body till he genuinely looks like this man right here. I mean, it doesn't even really feel like horror. The main villain is the main character's stupidity. I could see why the story may make it seem like, ooh, what's the mystery behind him wanting to be a robot? Is there something supernatural with that? But instead, the lack of a motive or answers to his action just makes it seem like there's no story to explore in the first place. So all this story really had going for it was a few kind of gruesome scenes, you could say, I guess, with what happened to the mother and the way she decided to take her own life. But overall, it just felt like a chore and a drag to get through. Well, not to worry. At least I'm done with that story and we don't have to worry about those characters anymore. I'm sure whatever number 24 is may be a bit better. Oh my fucking god. Man, I just kind of want to move on away from this one. What to do? I don't really want to talk about this one. Bronze films.
Neo, what did you do to my wall?
Hey, Bronzy boy, my good pal. Hey, you've read the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX before, right?
Yeah, I've read them.
Great, talk about B7 too. Goodbye.
Wait, you better pay for my wall. Hey everyone, my name is Bronze Films, and today I'm here to help Neo rank all the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX stories. So to summarize B7-2, after the events of being crushed, Billy wakes up in the hospital somehow still alive. As he recovers, he reconnects with people from his past and slowly starts living like a human again. But his discarded robotic parts, which now call themselves B7, come back trying to merge with him once more. But his dying grandmother sacrifices herself by luring B7 into herself, which then frees Billy for good. So as a result of her sacrifice, Billy accepts new prosthetics and heads to Peru to find his father, ready to live his new life. Now personally, I think this is a great pathological horror story and a fitting sequel to the first B7 story. It can be seen as an emotional story that revolves around Billy and his own trauma. The idea of robotic parts that were once attached to you coming back into your life is pretty terrifying and a unique concept. So I think this is definitely one of the better Tales from the PIZZAPLEX stories and one that I would rank pretty high.
Damn, he actually convinced me it was pretty good. And at number 23, we have the animatronic apocalypse. Just by that title alone, this sounds like such a damn crazy idea, right? Fucking Angry Willy over here had enough of this world, decided to release all of his creations, just full-on fucking apocalypse. Sounds like a weirdly cool idea, right? Well, throw all that out the window because this has nothing to do with that. A quote-unquote animatronic apocalypse is nothing but a Fazbear Entertainment branded Dungeons and Dragons ripoff.
The Zany Regional Spin-off Edition.
Except, of course, let's not forget this is Tales from the PIZZAPLEX, which means we gotta be extra weird and crazy with our stories. So why not have this Dungeons & Dragons game actually take over and brainwash the entire school? Scott, what the fuck were you smoking to come up with these ideas? Of course, the principal of this school goes from hating the animatronic apocalypse game to all of a sudden going on the intercoms just talking all about it like, guys, Freddy Fazbear needs our help. It is such a fucking weird, crazy story, and the only reason it is not even lower on the list is purely because of the shock value. But after you get over the weird, crazy plot, what you're left with is a story without any deaths, without any gore, and especially without any mentions of the PIZZAPLEX. Come on, man, you know me. I need at least one of those to enjoy the damn thing. I mean, come on, at least the two B7 stories had a bit of body horror with them. This one doesn't even really have that going for it. But other than that, there's nothing that really stands out in the story, so best to just go ahead and move on. And now for number 22, Lally's Game. Now, what I'm about to say may not make much sense to a lot of you, but have you ever watched Jack in the Box? Or just any Tubi horror movie that was made on like zero budget by like some unknown indie film person? Fucking Freddy's Friday. That's honestly how this story feels. The plot just sort of reminds me of like one of those types of movies. We follow a woman named Selena.
Celine, how the hell do you know her?
And her and her husband finally move in together. While they're unpacking, the husband uncovers a box. The box containing Lally. Eventually, Lally gets free. You have a cool couple suspenseful moments where they're almost having to play like hide and seek with her, and it honestly all makes for a fairly enjoyable story. The whole shtick about the plot feeling like it came from a cheap Tubi horror movie, that wasn't necessarily an insult. I'm just a fucking horror junkie. But that said, this story is far from perfect. In fact, the whole connection back into the PIZZAPLEX just feels so forced, which is extra bad considering that this is one of the first stories in this new series. They never enter the PIZZAPLEX or anything. It just so happens that this Lally doll coincidentally originates from the PIZZAPLEX. But other than that, there's really nothing that connects this to any other aspects of the FNAF lore. So yeah, overall, while not bad, it's also not necessarily the best. So moving on to number 21, we have Bleeding Heart. In Bleeding Heart, we follow Danny. Danny's character can be summed up by pretty much one word. Simp. Danny has a big crush on Daisy. Apparently Daisy really likes tattoos, so Danny does the only logical thing in this situation, steals some crazy killer shit from the PIZZAPLEX that causes his flesh to get cut off like a tattoo. This means he's just casually cutting off his own flesh to impress a girl with his quote-unquote tattoos, which eventually makes him really mad once he realizes that Daisy actually doesn't give a single fuck about him and only cares about his tattoos. And upon that realization, he does yet another very logical step and chooses to kill himself in the most violent fucking way possible. What's that? A noose? A bullet to the brain? Nah, we don't need any of that. Let's just get my fucking micro animatronic to trim through my flesh so much to where I'm nothing but a beating heart on the ground. Not gonna lie, the goriness of this kill is actually really cool, and the way we get to see this kill revealed through Daisy's perspective added a cool creepiness to it. But also, with that said, Danny's just fucking stupid. He makes so many stupid decisions throughout the story, with his ending death being the most stupidest. But honestly, I guess it's to be expected, considering there's a lot of horror stories that really just rely on the main character's stupidity in order to move the plot forward. Yeah. But aside from that, the reason this story's so low on the list pretty much boils down to, once again, a lack of FNAF-related subject matter. But it's not as low as the few of the other stories because, at least with this one, the plot is still pretty interesting. And the final kill is pretty cool. But yeah, moving on to number 20, the gods have answered our prayers. We are finally getting more FNAF-related subject matter with number 20, The Monty Within. At first, whenever I tried reading The Monty Within, I actually didn't bother finishing it because at the time, I didn't have this goal of reading every single PIZZAPLEX story. But I honestly did learn to appreciate this story after I found so many other stories being even worse. Like, for crying out loud, at least in this stories, the characters actually go into the PIZZAPLEX. We follow a man named Kane. Kane is doing some sort of essay about how half of our brain sort of works like an AI. He calls it the AI within. Sounds similar to something else, huh? The overall story proceeds to use Kane's essay premise in order to justify how one day when he was at the PIZZAPLEX, all of a sudden half of his brain is possessed by Monty, and his intrusive thoughts pretty much just become Monty. You know how some people say that anytime you're having a bad or intrusive thought, it's the devil putting these evil thoughts in your brain? Well, it looks like the devil can take a day off because Monty's here to fucking do that job for him. As the story goes on and Monty proceeds to ruin Kane's social life, it all ends with Monty forcing Kane to go headfirst into the school's saw. He gets his head fucking cut in half. And to make it all worse, this is his school, so there's a chance a student may just fucking walk in and see his corpse just fucking there straight in half. It's honestly a pretty cool kill, and as we go on, this sort of gore will be more prevalent throughout Tales from the PIZZAPLEX. But although this story's premise is pretty interesting, it does take a while to fully be able to explain the whole idea, making for a pretty slow beginning to the story. Although the premise itself does seem to slightly connect back to the whole Vanny and Vanessa situation in Security Breach, so I'm glad to see at least some sort of connection back to the game's lore. But other than that, the story can be pretty forgettable. The only thing I've yet to mention is that apparently in my notes I wrote that Pizzeria Simulator was mentioned. I'm pretty sure there was like a name drop to it at some point in time, but I don't exactly remember the context on where. So yeah, moving on. And at number 19, we have Haps. Man, I'm tired. I kind of want to break from all this. I wonder what Bronze Films is up to.
Again? What is it this time, Neo?
Bronze Films, can you rank Haps for me?
If I do this, will you finally pay for the damages?
Sure.
To summarize the story, Haps, Aiden and Jace get into trouble at the arcade and bond over the love for the animatronic Haps. While exploring Freddy's fortress, a confusing mirror maze, they try to scare some kids, but instead they end up meeting Haps itself. So when they get lost and trapped inside the maze's pipes, Haps insists on leading them out before suddenly turning hostile and chasing them through the tunnels. After a horrifying chase, Haps injures Jace, forcing Aiden to run alone while dealing with the loss of Jace. Trapped and cornered, Aiden finds a one-way window where kids are playing on the other side, finally feeling invisible and safe from Haps' view. Personally, I do like the story overall, but it also has its fair share of issues. Like, what caused Haps to turn aggressive? I like the idea of it starting as a friendly animatronic before turning on Aiden and Jace, but again, why? It can also be argued that the ending feels lackluster and unsatisfying. So overall, I would just say that Haps is an okay story, but not that good compared to the other stories on this list. Now it's time to pay up. Do you have any idea how long repairs will take?
What's that? Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm leaving now. Bye.
Ugh, I can't with that guy.
And at number 18, we have Clethrophobia, otherwise known as that one Ballora story for anybody like me who has all the phobia names all just jumbled up in their head. We follow Grady, a guy with, let's say it together now, Clethrophobia. He's working the night shift at an under construction pizzaplex when he gets stuck in an attraction of a bunch of tubes. Wanna guess who else is in the tubes? Ballora. So Ballora has to help him get unstuck. I mean, usually it's the other way around, but hey, I'm not here to kink shame. This eventually leads to another pretty dope kill where Ballora is helping drag him out of the tube, but in the process just stretches all his limbs and shatters all his bones because those tubes are far too small to fit a middle-aged fat guy. Overall, not a bad story. I appreciate the usage of the pizzaplex, and of course I appreciate the gory kill. I thought it was interesting how by the end the friends finally showed back up to work only to see him in that condition stuck inside of the tubes, and then they have a debate on, well, should we free him or should we just leave him there? I especially found this ending debate interesting because it sort of fits with the theme of the games where it has Fazbear Entertainment being such an evil corrupt entity to where they would actually be more benefited if they just left and act like nothing ever happened. It was just actually an interesting way to go ahead and end off this story.
Can we talk about like the political and economic state of the world right now?
And a few last little details that I really appreciated was the way it connected itself to other stories. Like there's a few lines in the beginning that shows that the opening part of the story takes place at the same time as Tiger Rock, and just little cool details such as that. But anyways, moving on to number 17, Submechaphobia, aka the water one. Now I understand that some of you may think that submechaphobia is sort of stretching it. Like, come on, a fear of animatronics underwater? Like, how fucking niche can you be? But honestly, this phobia can be pretty fucking scary. I mean, just look at this squid. This is an animatronic and it's fucking horrifying. That video is actually what a couple years back convinced me that I have submechaphobia. Because at least with normal animatronics, you can always, you know, run away. But if you're stuck underwater with an animatronic, not only is your vision a whole lot worse, but also, you know, the fuck are you gonna do? Swim away? How good of a swimmer are you? So nonetheless, going into the story, I was interested to see see how Scott would tackle this phobia that I was oddly already familiar with. So with that said, in the story, we follow Mr. Protagonist. His name's Mr. Protagonist because I forgot to write his name in my notes. Mr. Protagonist works with animatronics that are in the underwater section of the PIZZAPLEX. As the story goes on, some suspicious things begin happening. Mr. Protagonist ends up finding a tennis shoe in the mouth of one of the animatronics, which creepily never receives any sort of explanation. And we even hear about a bunch of kids that ended up dying by one of the animatronics underwater, which is gnarly as fuck if it wasn't for the fact that it was all a dream. I did find the big plot twist reveal pretty interesting. This whole time I just sort of assumed it was the animatronics that were acting up, but really the person trying to secretly kill him was actually his own boss slash manager slash some sort of role like that. I just found it neat that the bad guy this time around turned out to be an actual human and not just some rogue AI like it usually is in these stories. But besides that, and besides the fact that the main character actually does survive until the very end, it otherwise sticks with the typical Tales from the PIZZAPLEX formula, which isn't necessarily bad, but also doesn't bring it up any higher in the ranking. But moving on to number 16, Frailty. Frailty is the first ever story in Tales from the PIZZAPLEX. And as the first story, I think it does an absolutely terrible job as an introduction. But with that said, I think as a story overall, it is pretty good. This story really surprised me whenever I listened to it because it feels very much like a spiritual sequel to Be Beautiful. For those of y'all who don't know, To Be Beautiful is the second ever story from Fazbear Frights. In To Be Beautiful, the main character uses this special pendant that does make her beautiful, but the moment she takes it off, it pretty much kills her. This story follows a new girl with that same exact pendant. But instead of using this as an excuse to retread the same story all over again, Jessica, the new girl with the pendant, already knows completely how the pendant works and is instead using what little time she probably has left in life to save other people's lives using the pendant. In the process, developing this ideology that her life is essentially meaningless and she should only take care of others and not herself, which makes it all the more heart-wrenching whenever we see her beginning to open back up and find new purpose in her life, only for reality to step back in and say, "Nuh-uh, you're supposed to die," and she ends up dying during prom night. Now, in all honesty, I have very few issues with this story. I actually quite enjoyed it. Yeah, it doesn't mention the PIZZAPLEX. Yeah, it feels like Scott's scrapped idea for a Fazbear Fright story, but it was still very nicely made and a good spin on the rules established in a previous story. That said, as an introduction to the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX series, it does not do its job. This definitely should have belonged in the Fazbear Fright series and not Tales from the PIZZAPLEX. But for what it is, I really enjoyed the story and I thought it was really touching. Just maybe would have been better to swap the position of this story and Lally's game. Not only would that make the first ever Tales from the PIZZAPLEX story actually mention the PIZZAPLEX, but then that way also the second ever Tales from the PIZZAPLEX story could have been the spiritual sequel to the second ever Fazbear Fright story. But getting even weirder with number 15, Help Wanted. In certain ways, I really like this story, but in other ways, I really don't like this story. In Help Wanted, we follow Steve.
I'm Steve.
Scott Cawthon, Steve, sorry about that, works at a insert no-name gas station here. While Mr. Totally Not Scott Cawthon is working at this Totally Not Dollar General, Fazbear Entertainment comes up to him with the deal of a lifetime. Literally, he can sell his soul away and create them a few games to clear their name. At first he says no, because he knows Fazbear Entertainment can be pretty shady, but eventually he just gets straight kidnapped and moved into a brand new house, where he is just completely and utterly gaslit into thinking that he's had a wife and kids this entire time. The story is also heavily alluding to the hallucinogenic gas that we later see in Didophobia, but it also continuously describes this ringing that Steve hears, so it makes me wonder if the hallucinogenic gas and the illusion discs are both at play here. But honestly, that's just a whole other can of worms that I don't even know how to unravel. Of course, if it wasn't obvious, we're led to believe that this is the indie game developer from FNAF Help Wanted, and this is the story of why he made the original FNAF games. Now, I both love and hate this connection back to the game's lore. First off, yay, extra lore for the games. That's stuff that I've always enjoyed most about these books. But second off, this is overall such a weird and extra way to explain something that didn't even need an explanation in the first place. What's so wrong with making the indie game developer just some indie game developer without having to add in all this illusionary supernatural BS, which if anything just has to go on to force the suspension of disbelief even harder for something that should have never needed it. And all of that's even considering that this is the same universe as the game's lore as well, which opens up a whole other can of worms and a whole other debate amongst the theorist community. community. And no matter which side you're on, I think we can all agree that the Tales games debate is by far some of the most annoying shit that we just really want an answer at this point for. But all that annoyance aside, looking at this story standalone, it's honestly pretty enjoyable with some pretty good scares. I've always loved the Tales stories that are pretty much just the main character's glorified drug trip. And considering the huge role the hallucinogenic gas plays, this is honestly just another one of those. The disturbing ending reveal where Steve's fake wife and kids just essentially turn into robots hunting him down create for an actually chilling climax. And the sort of ending existential question of whether or not he should give in to these illusions was honestly such a cool and interesting way to end off the story. So although as a forced piece of media onto the FNAF lore it feels really unnecessary and really unneeded, but as a standalone story, it's pretty fucking good. So moving on to number 14, Under Construction. The story's so weird that even though it barely has any tie to Freddy's as a whole, it somehow managed to climb its way all the way up here in the list. We follow Maya and her loving family as she proceeds to watch everyone around the world get cancer, turn into weird goo creatures, and die. Yeah, third ever installment in Tales from the PIZZAPLEX and the whole world dies from cancer. Jesus Christ, someone tell Scott to lay off the shrooms. The reason it's so high up is because I feel like this story actually does a good job at making you care for Maya and her family before everything just sort of goes to shit in the world. All of a sudden, everybody just starts having weird pink goo babies, which could be connected to Fazgoo, but I don't really know. I mean, could you blame me? I never read Fazgoo. But with everyone around her slowly dying from cancer, it actually creates for some surprisingly sad moments. I mean, at one point, she's even shown trying to take care of her very weak and very sick 5-ish-year-old bedridden cousins who are very close to dying. By the end of the story, when we can pretty much assume that she is the last person left on Earth, she proceeds to get crushed due to a literal overpopulation of those weird gooey babies that I mentioned earlier. And also still no word on whether she dies or not. She could just be living the rest of her life flat as a pancake, just crushed, nowhere to go. The best way I can describe it is it just gives you that same feeling you get when you finish the Evangelion movie for the first time, and you're just sitting there thinking, what the fuck? It gives you no explanations to why any of this is happening, it just happens, and for some reason, it works. But this video is starting to get way too long, so I need to move on. And at number 13, we have Didophobia, or FNAF 4 the book, in case some of y'all don't know their phobias yet. This one suffers from the same exact issue as Help Wanted, where standalone, it's actually a really fucking good and really disturbing story. But when trying to bring it into the FNAF lore, it just complicates shit so fucking much for an unnecessary reason. We follow Rory, a kid who is yet another victim to some hallucinogenic gas bullshit. He lives the same day and night over and over again at the FNAF 4 house and bedroom until he finally learns to break free, where he traverses the sister location bunker, finds out that he's actually been missing for fucking years. And as soon as he's so close to escaping, he pulls a Steve from Help Wanted and decides to go back and live the life of an illusion. Now that I'm saying it out loud, it actually is surprisingly odd the amount of connections that this story has back to Help Wanted. The story, not the game. Of course, this is the big story that really put hallucinogenic gas in the spotlight of all theorists' mind. But other than that, in terms of wider lore connection, does this mean that William Afton is experimenting with other kidnapped children? Like, what the fuck does this mean? Is this even canon to the games? Now we're going to this fucking debate again. Once again, it's cool, it's so connected to the game's lore, but it's also so unnecessary and just so fucking bullshit, where it only really excels in being a pretty good standalone story. Overall lore implications aside. Number 12, Somnophobia. In Somnophobia, we follow Sam. Sam is pretty much the embodiment of the actually meme. That is him until all of a sudden he takes this moondrop orb looking thing as a prize from the PizzaPlex, which is essentially fucking Fazbear Entertainment's version of shrooms. He literally gets transported to a different world and can see sounds and hear colors, and it's shrooms. It's fucking shrooms. Fazbear Entertainment is selling drugs to kids. He uses this to relive childhood memories of him and his dead dad, which over time causes him to get more and more addicted until eventually a dog eats his face off. Ah yes, the usual lasting effects of shrooms, dog eating your face.
The bear started eating the face.
I once again really liked this one. Like I said earlier, I appreciate any of the Tales stories that just sort of have the characters go through glorified drug trips, and this one's no exception. So moving on to number 11, Alone Together. Alone Together is another one of those stories that, yes, doesn't involve the PizzaPlex, but holy shit, it's still so good without it. The main character, Travis, feels like a ghost around this town because his parents never really pay much attention to him. Only his grandma does. does. Upon being assigned a school project, it turns out the project he's doing has already been done a few years back. Upon looking for that past student's past project, he comes across a school shed. Upon entering, not only does he find that past project, but he also finds his own corpse. It's then revealed that he was actually a ghost this entire time, who, as his grandma, who is also a ghost, once explained, because you don't realize you are a ghost, you are still lost, you have yet to move on. And holy shit, whenever this was revealed, I got fucking goosebumps. It was fucking crazy. Fucking emotional too, because after that you hear the father call the mother about the dead son, and it's just like he's fucking right there listening as the ghost, and it's crazy. Literally fucking bad parenting type reveal, if y'all remember that game. We also get to hear some cool lore and possible implications on how ghosts work in the FNAF lore. And I'm pretty sure there was also a bit of a nod towards dream theory. Also, at one point the school mentions an old dog costume they used to have, which just made me think of Edwin, since he's always making costumes and shit, and I just was wondering if that had any sort of connection, but nothing like too big of a deal. Honestly, I fucking love this story so much. My only criticism is I feel like the FNAF aspect was a little forced into the story. It's almost like Scott Cawthon had this really cool idea and premise, but just felt like he had to shove in FNAF in some shape or form. Pretty much the project he's making is just this wooden sun from Security Breach. But overall, I don't think it was that big of an issue, and I still really enjoyed the story nonetheless. And now for number 10, Drowning. Now, to be completely honest, the reason this one is so high up probably also has to do with my bias towards this one being one of the more earlier stories I read. But anyways, in this story, we follow Kara. No, not Kara Undertale, I'm talking Kara FNAF. Kara FNAF gets a little impatient waiting in the line of the VR booth, but after convincing the worker, even after it's closed, she finally gets to play the new VR attraction. This attraction ends up transporting her into some fucking subliminal backrooms type world filled with tons and tons of pools. Now, I'm actually a big fan of these sort of simulated looking subliminal little areas, and so right off the bat, I'm already sort of taking a liking to this setting. And to make things even creepier, although she is supposed to be all alone, she actually finds some sort of girl that is always trapped at the very bottom of the pool. Any pool she goes near, she keeps on seeing this girl with dark black hair. This dark-haired girl keeps on trying to attack her and drag her into the pool to drown her, eventually successfully doing so, leading for her friends to only find her corpse in that VR booth. Not only does this tale also manage to be pretty creepy and eerie and have that nice sort of era of mystery that some of these tales can really excel in, but there's also heavy speculation that this drowned girl is supposed to be Cassidy. There isn't a whole lot of evidence going for this though. It's really just because she has black hair, and at one point she's compared to a princess. But whether that little theory is true or not, it's still a really good story nonetheless. So moving on to number 9, Nexie. I like to think of Nexie as FNAF's version of Chucky, or Scott's way of tackling the sort of killer doll genre of horror. This is yet another really dark and gruesome story in Tales from the PIZZAPLEX, at one point even having a 4th grader get hit by a car and dying. If you want to be a cool kid in your kindergarten class, then make sure to head over to your local PIZZAPLEX and purchase a Buddytronic. Buddytronics are like Build-A-Bear if you were to pump load a fuck ton of AI inside them. We follow Astrid, a little girl who ends up getting her very own Buddytronic. Although her very own Buddytronic, Nexie, turns out really fucked up looking and just, well, you can see by the cover. Over the course of the story, Nexie convinces Astrid that she needs to be beautiful. All leading up to an ending which implies that either Nexie gets some new parts and uses Astrid's corpse as a skin suit, which may I remind you, Astrid is a fucking kindergartner. What the fuck is this gore? Or it could also be implying that Astrid just replaced her body parts with robot parts until she just doesn't even look like a human no more. But I think that one's less likely to be the case. Either way, at this point, it should be obvious why I liked this story so much, because it is just so fucked up. Nothing much else to say about it, I just like fucked up shit, and this one is really fucked up. And so then, leading us to number 8. Pressure. Now, this story is actually a really interesting case. This one stands out to me because it was originally recommended by one of you guys. Dumbly stupid, if you happen to be watching this video too, thank you for the recommendation. Pressure is definitely a really interesting story. This time around, we're exploring the roleplay department, essentially Fazbear's gimmick of, hey, let's make even more fun of our past mistakes so people won't believe them. We follow Luca and his friends as they go on to try the Springtrap attraction, where Luca will put on the Springtrap suit and chase around his friends. But surprise, surprise, the Springtrap suit actually ends up being a real spring lock suit. And so now Luca is slowly being spring locked as he's trying to get the attention of his friends, trying to alert them of his dire situation, all while his friends just keep on thinking, oh wow, he's such a good actor, running away acting like helpless victims in the roleplay, having no idea that he actually really needs their help. Eventually his condition is so bad that he loses his friends, and his friends just end up ditching him, assuming that he'll make his way out eventually. But the story really takes an interesting turn after this, when a bunch of even younger kids go in that same roleplay setup, but the person the kids are running from is actually a real killer who does want to kidnap and murder the kids. And so now Luca, aka Springtrap, has to go and save the day, killing this sick, creepy PIZZAPLEX worker to save the kids, all before he bleeds to death in the Springtrap suit. It is such a fucking interesting and cool spin on the Springtrap character, and I absolutely love the complete contrast, just fucking 180 flip from what you'd expect off of somebody in a Springtrap suit. And even the way that at the very beginning they introduced the younger kids and the weird suspicious PIZZAPLEX worker, although at first I thought was a little bit of a stretch, just assuming that this guy was automatically some weird creep, like who knows, maybe it was one of the kids' dads. But I mean, looking back on it now, I actually think it was really well done for what it was trying to set up. So yeah, I'd say that this is definitely one hell of an awesome story. And at number 7, we got The Bobby Dots Part 1. The Bobby Dots has always been an interesting case. This is one of the few stories throughout Tales from the PIZZAPLEX to get 2 different parts to them. As I went into this not knowing at the time that B7 also had a sequel story, I was curious what made this one so special to get another sequel. Does that mean the story's just gonna stop halfway for a later conclusion? How does Scott handle a 2-parter? As far as I knew, which I could have very well been wrong about, Fazbear Frights never had a part 2 to any of those stories. I do at least gotta give it to Scott for this though. I appreciate that anytime he does a part 2 to a previous story, he makes it the focal point of that book's cover. That way any casual fans won't have to look too hard in order to find the conclusion to the story that they already started through a different book. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, this entry is only about part 1 of the Bobby Dots. Part 2 is coming later. The first thing I found really interesting about this story is its PIZZAPLEX. This story takes place in the new security breach look of the PIZZAPLEX as opposed to Scott Cawthon's more circular shaped design in the past books. And honestly, both Bobby Dots stories use this to their full advantage. There are times when we outright get full explanations as to little mysteries or little details from the security breach game. This was a huge surprise, but a welcome one at that. I tried my best to write down any important ones while listening to the audiobook, and so I'll go ahead and tell them to y'all now. Since there was a law in the lighting plan and there was already installations in place, Fazbear Entertainment put generators in the daycare as sort of the cheapest option on how to combat the lighting issue. Not only that, but also the Sun animatronic himself started off as a theater animatronic before being turned into the daycare attendant. And none of this is me speculating, this is literally what the book straight up tells us. None of that seemed like much. Here, I got one last detail for you. Get this, apparently the reason DJ Music Man attacks you in Security Breach isn't because he's hacked by Vanny, but because he has a scrapped bouncer mode. Imagine getting kicked out of a bar by a fucking kaiju-sized colorful animatronic spider. Anyways, lore revelations aside, let's see how the story actually is. We follow a man named Abe. Abe.
Abe. Abe, it's been years.
Abe is a PIZZAPLEX worker who is down on his luck, and when I say down on his luck, I mean homeless. He lives at the PIZZAPLEX. Hey, that's something him and Gregory have in common. Eventually he gets a promotion that lets him live in the Fazplex Tower, essentially the headquarters for all mega PIZZAPLEX buildings, because yes, there is multiple. Also, this building just so happens to be right next to the mega PIZZAPLEX, which is, you know, a cool little detail. Upon sneakily moving into an unfinished restricted apartment, he is met with the Bobby Dots, 3 holographic anime girl-looking assistants that he later names Rose, Gemini, and Olive. As time goes on, it seems like certain commands and certain things in the house begin trying to kill him. At first he thinks it's the Bobby Dots doing, but eventually the Bobby Dots reveal that it's actually due to the actions of the Bobby Dots Gen 1, and the ones that have been helping him are the Bobby Dots Gen 2. The Bobby Dots Gen 1 apparently only have physical forms that are stuck in the attic and that killed the previous owner here, thus why this room was originally restricted. So with that reveal, Abe goes on to work with the Bobby Dots Gen 2 to put a stop to these Gen 1. And from there, it's to be continued. Honestly, this story has quite a bit of nuance for just one part. Not only do I absolutely love the little tiny hints and lore reveals we're getting throughout the story, but also just all the characters are pretty good and likable at this point in time. It's interesting to see Fazbear Entertainment's equivalent of some sort of like home base for their company, and there's some good mystery on whether or not you should trust the Bobby Dots Gen 2 before it's revealed that Gen 1 are actually to blame for causing havoc. Or, then again, are they to blame? Number 6, Bobby Dots Part 2. Bobby Dots Part 2 actually has a really interesting plot twist when it's revealed that Gen 1 was actually quote-unquote causing havoc to try to stop Gen 2's plans from killing you. That's right, Gen 2, Rose, Olive, and Gemini have been actually trying to kill you, and any hiccups in their plans, they've blamed it on Gen 1. So how does Abe take this revelation and combat Gen 2? Well, he does so by finding a girlfriend. At this point, they all work together to maneuver the house that, may I remind you, the Gen 2 have complete control over, which make for an interesting, surprisingly action-heavy climax, where the Gen 2 die and Abe, his girlfriend, and his hospitalized mother, sorry, forgot to mention that part earlier, can all now live happily ever after. The end. Overall, I really liked both of these parts, and I feel like the plot twist about the Gen 1 and Gen 2 Bobby Dots was surprisingly unexpected. Also, moving past the summary, there were a few other tiny details I really appreciated, such as a little opening recap just to make sure that anybody who didn't read part 1 wouldn't be completely left out. I also want to say Abe's girlfriend Sasha was like pretty much fucking OP. She like got shit done. She was like, what's this? You live with a bunch of killer AI? Ain't none of those AI killing my man. Also throughout part 1, Abe was helping out this brand new PizzaPlex worker, just kind of showing him around the place, pretty much using him as a plot device to explain to the viewer some of the lore drops involving the daycare and DJ Music Man. And even though he was really only a plot device in that first part, I'm surprised he never made any sort of appearance in part 2. But you want to know who did make an appearance in part 2? That's right, the fucking Mr. Hippo Magnet. Oh yeah. And lastly, before we move on, I actually do have a theory involving the Bobby Dots. Anytime Abe would scream around the second Gen 1 Bobby Dot, he would go on to copy his scream. Dare I say, mimic his scream. This honestly makes me wonder, what if the Bobby Dots, or at the very least Gen 1, used the Mimic 1 program? This wouldn't really be a huge reveal or affect anything lore-wise, so yeah, just a little small thought.
He gets the top of her head. I'll do my best to stay in one piece.
Now, moving on to number 5, the epilogue. Every Tales from the PizzaPlex book ended with a little excerpt from a completely different story. A story that essentially explains how the Mimic made it to the PizzaPlex. Sort of a transition point from that original Mimic story to the new PizzaPlex Mimic-focused stories we see later on. In the very first epilogue, the Mimic is brought into the construction site where the Mega PizzaPlex is being built. Surprisingly, the construction workers managed to teach the Mimic to help them. But upon running out of parts and pieces to put in piles, the Mimic begins to put the human parts and pieces into piles, and by parts and pieces, I mean limbs. He begins ripping off the human's limbs. The surviving construction workers understandably begin to freak out, all leading to one of the coolest scenes in Tales from the PizzaPlex, where they accidentally lead the Mimic into an area with a whole lot of other construction workers, leading the Mimic to go on a literal rampage, just murdering any human that is unlucky enough to be in his way, as everybody stumbles across each other trying to desperately escape, eventually leading them to trapping the Mimic inside by sealing the wall with concrete. It is such a cool and brutal fucking moment, and seems to be like an opening kill equivalent to the rest of the story, because as the rest of the epilogues continue, we follow in very typical slasher form a group of dumbass teenagers who go to the PizzaPlex's construction site into the old abandoned pizzeria, at first just to explore, but eventually end up getting picked off one by one by the Mimic in very brutal, gruesome ways. It is so fucking 90s, 80s slasher coded, and I love it. I know Blumhouse really wants Scott to make even more movies even after this little trilogy he's planning on doing, and honestly, I hope he adapts this epilogue story into a slasher movie. Now with that said, it doesn't mean it's completely without any problems. Due to the insanely big cast of characters, it's really hard to remember who is who, and a lot of the times the names can just get mixed up in your head. But if this were to be turned into a movie, then that wouldn't be an issue, because then you'd also have a face to associate every character with. This epilogue also does a good job highlighting highlighting the mimic's other abilities and other little powers, I guess you could say, that he has. There's even this one fucking kill where he just, as that little weird spider creature, crawls into a mascot costume that one of the humans is hiding in and just fucking crushes her, just crushing all the bones. It's so gruesome. I love all the kills in these epilogues. And to make it even more slasher-esque, there's even a final girl. Just come on, Scott, please make a movie adaptation. It would be fucking awesome. And at number 4, we have the storyteller.
My name is Edward. I made the mimic. It was difficult to
Up to this point, many stories in the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX series have been hinting towards this giant tree that's in the middle of this pizza-shaped like Pizzaplex. Well, the storyteller will finally be our answer to what the fuck this tree really is. In the storyteller story, we follow Edwin Murray, around 60 years of age. Now, I know at this point all of you guys should already know who Edwin is with all the memes and all the recent lore about him, but believe it or not, this was actually his first appearance in this book series. This story predates the original Mimic tale, which is surprising considering how many little references and stuff there are to that original Mimic story, which I guess at the time just ended up seeming like weird or interesting mysteries because people straight up didn't know what the Mimic story was back then. But also besides that, there's lots of interesting little lore details and snippets that are spread across this book. For starters, getting introduced to the CEO of Fazbear Entertainment himself, Markiplier.
What the fuck?
That's right, I know some of y'all have forgotten, but Markiplier is in fact a character in the FNAF lore. We do in fact see him in the ad for FNAF Special Delivery, where we can tell at the very least he is a part of Fazbear Entertainment. Now, believe it or not, there is actually really good evidence that Withered Circle pointed out to me that could possibly be Scott telling us that Markiplier, of all people, is actually the new CEO of Fazbear Entertainment. Don't believe me? Well, just listen to how the book describes Mr. Burrows.
He had a fine jawline, sculpted cheekbones, and a strong, full mouth. However, the majestic nose was just a bit too majestic, and his eyes were a tad too small and set close together. Even so, his dark, almost black, eyes, and the shiny ebony hair that liked to flop over his broad forehead in a charming sort of way, combined with the aforementioned nose to create eye-catching impact.
You cannot tell me this is not just the book describing Markiplier. Mr. Burrows is Markiplier confirmed. The book also goes out of its way to point out that Mr. Burrows is only 35 years old, which is actually around the same age as Markiplier is. Anyways, that aside, the story centers around the creation of the storyteller, a giant tree that many other books in the series have already referenced as being in the middle of the Pizzaplex, which from a design point is really ironic, considering that it looks exactly like a tree, something that is supposed to be very natural and in tide with nature, although its main job is to be an AI artificial intelligence replacement to actual real human storytellers. Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you may already know that I absolutely hate AI generated bullshit. It is just such a fucking dick slap to anybody who actually puts in real work and real passion into their art and creations, which is also what Edwin Murray, our protagonist in this story, also believes. But unfortunately for him, Mr. Burrows and all the other CEO fuckers think, nah, it's fine. What's that? Workers actually need jobs and to be paid? Nah. From there, we follow Edwin, who intends to get rid of this storyteller program, but surprise, surprise, the storyteller program is actually the Mimic program, the very program that he created many years ago. Edwin confronts Mr. Burrows. Mr. Burrows, are you using my old Mimic chip? Is that what you're doing, Mr. Burrows? Are you stealing from me?
Hello, everybody. My name is Markiplier.
Once Mr. Burrows is finally fed up with Edwin's shit, he decides to lock Edwin inside of the storyteller tree, where Edwin comes across a giant white tiger head, where he soon goes crazy, suffocates, and dies. Mr. Burrows is like, oh boy, I sure haven't heard a peep from Edwin recently. I hope he's still alive in there. I hope I didn't accidentally kill him. Oh, whoops, that would have been bad. Whoops, oh shit. Then Mr. Burrows also realizes he's locked in there himself as well, where he also too presumably suffocates and dies. This story is a super fun read, which gives us a lot of extra information about the inner workings of Fazbear Entertainment and lots of lore revelations that could definitely be used to explain many mysteries throughout the game still, such as the seemingly endless amount of energy that the Pizzaplex has. Ever wonder how the Pizzaplex seems to have enough energy to literally keep all of its lights on even while it's closed, as we see in Security Breach? Well, on page 87,
Was that the
Edwin says, and all the happy screams and shouts and chatter was like an electrical circuit that, if could have been harnessed, probably would have generated enough power to run a dozen pizzaplexes. With how weird and oddly specific that wording is, don't you think that that could be Scott Cawthon telling us exactly how the pizzaplex is ran this whole time? Maybe not from the happy emotions that Edwin's talking about, but maybe from agony. We also hear about how the storyteller's coding, which is the mimic's coding, and how that causes the animatronics to start going bonkers and start to increase their negative emotions, which really heavily connects this story back to the main security breach game, considering that is exactly how the animatronics began acting in that game as well. Like I said, in case you can't tell already, so many good lore bits and so many good story bits, just overall a really solid entry into the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX stories. And at number 3, we have the one, the only, the Mimic. Now, this was actually the very first Tales from the PIZZAPLEX story I ever listened to. This was the story that completely changed my opinions on the Tales from the PIZZAPLEX series. What I originally thought I would never waste my time reading, I in fact read all of them and really enjoyed them. All of that just because I decided randomly one night to buy the audiobook to this specific story because the Secret of the Mimic trailer released. And of course, because this is the first story I read, that means that I will also be very biased towards it. Unlike with the others, I'm not going to give you a summary of this one just because with how important it is to the lore, I'm sure you've heard plenty of other theory YouTubers recap the shit out of this one story already. I mean, let's be honest, you've all already heard the story. In fact, some of y'all even thought that this had to be in the #1 spot whenever I announced I was doing this video. Unfortunately though, I will admit this story does have a few flaws. Although don't get me wrong, overall I really enjoyed it, but the fact that it is sort of split into 2 even shorter stories, I think lessens the emotional connection that you can get with the characters by the end of the story, or by the time something tragic is supposed to happen. Like by the time David gets run over by the truck, we're only halfway through the story, which if you think about it is only 1/6 of one of these books. But I mean, overall this is just a tiny critique, and it's not too obvious. Like, it's not that big of a deal, you still get to know them enough. But moving on to Edwin's character, it seems like he's characterized in this book to be very similar to Henry and William, which I'm very curious if that sticks whenever we get the game adaptation with Secret of the Mimic. I'm definitely curious to see if they just take the same characterization of Edwin from the books, or if they make him more of his own unique character in the games. But anyways, that's besides the point. Overall, this story is really high up there for obvious reasons, like, you know, the introduction to the Mimic, one of my favorite FNAF villains to this day. And also with Secret of the Mimic, it seems like this story is going to be more important to the game's lore than ever before. And of course, a big aspect on how I'm ranking these has to do with its importance to the game's timeline. Just cause, you know, I like the lore. I'm a FNAF lore guy. Also, like I've been mentioning throughout this video, this is yet another Tales from the PIZZAPLEX story that does not actually have any mention of the Pizzaplex in it, but obviously I'm willing to let that slide for this story because it's still so important, especially to the Pizzaplex and its creation. So yeah, this story gets a big pass. But besides that, I don't really have much else to say about the story that anybody else hasn't already said in the community. It's the Mimic story, and it's a cool story, and it's time to move on. Alright, now I'm gonna be completely honest, these last 2 are practically interchangeable on which one's number 2 and which one's number 1, both of which I've been debating for a while, swapping them back and forth from 2nd place to 1st place. They are both so good, and I genuinely don't think I can fully decide on which one's better, but alas, I need to make this video and I need to come up with a decision. So, for number 2, we have GGY. GGY is just straight up more Gregory characterization, which I love because of the way it just continues to develop the FNAF universe. Not just the book universe like the rest of these books have been doing, but even the game's universe as well. I think that this book has even more likely of a chance of being canon to the game's timeline than possibly even the Mimic story. It is very clear that this story is Scott's way of pointing us in the right direction after the confusing lore implications that came with Security Breach. But even that aside, the whole overall GGY mystery that the protagonist is uncovering throughout the whole book is just really intriguing. In the story, Tony Becker partners up with his 2 best friends for a brand new project for school. One of those friends being described to look extremely similar to Gregory and goes by the nickname of Dr. Rabbit. As Tony goes through the Pizzaplex to look for some sort of mystery that he can uncover for his school project, he sees on the leaderboards on every single arcade machine GGY. GGY. This little rabbit hole and soon gets a lot deeper as he discovers that not only has GGY been hacking the animatronics, but has also been luring people into the Pizzaplex presumably to kill them, only for it to end with Greg, aka Dr. Rabbit, inviting his good friend Tony back to the Pizzaplex after he got upset, implying that Tony probably ain't gonna live for much longer. So yeah, not only does this story have the huge reveal that Gregory is actually patient 46, but it's also just in general so cool to finally see some stories in this series that really connect back to the main security breach game. Like the GGY on all the arcade machines, that is genuinely something that you can see in the main security breach game, which just makes it all the more awesome to finally also have it in this book as such an important plot thread, especially considering the amount of Tales from the Pizzaplex stories that usually have nothing to do with the security breach game itself, making the story stand out with such importance to the lore and so much more interesting characterization to Gregory. I also think the main character of Tony is a cool concept. There's nothing really too special or unique about his personality that's worth mentioning or praising here, but it is sort of cool in the way he resembles or sort of mirrors us, the audience, the ones who play the games, the theorists in the community. We are literally going through the story, watching him uncover this mystery that actually genuinely exists in the main security breach game. It very much seems almost like a stand-in or a self-insert for the theorists in the community. So fuck yeah, this story is one of the best ones there is. And I actually think there is only one other story that can top this one, leading us to number 1, Tiger Rock. Like I said, it was a close battle between Tiger Rock and GGY, but in the end, I just felt like Tiger Rock has just that bit of edge that makes it personally better in my book. And when I say edge, I mean literal edge, more edginess. I've always been a big fan of how Tales from the Pizzaplex handles its gore. It is so refreshing to go into these stories and get detailed shit of fucked up shit happening, especially when it seems like the games, at least, have taken a little bit more of a kid-friendly side to its horror. I'm a big fan of whenever franchises, games, or any sort of media pushes the limits of what people would expect when it comes to stuff such as gore or any other more taboo subjects in fiction. And oh boy, does Tiger Rock not disappoint. In this story, we follow Kai, Todd, and Asher. Kai being really the only one out of these three that really matters too much to the story. But anyways, this timeless trio, their name not mine, are once again visiting the Mega Pizzaplex. Kai wants to try this only one-day exclusive brand new attraction, where he then has to enter this pod-looking area, and then in all fucking the Welt style, everywhere around him will change to look like the Pizzaplex in the far, far future. No, not that future, a different future. A future where everything is even more high-tech and Freddy actually has real fur like a bear. So Freddy walks up to Kai looking like he came straight out of a fucking AAA game with all those different little fibers of hair. He's all like, "Hello, superstar, welcome to the future." And Kai's like, "What the fuck?" Anyways, Freddy isn't the only animatronic now with hyper-realistic fur, because we are also gonna get introduced to the Pizzaplex's brand new animatronic from the far future, Tiger Rock. Tiger Rock continues to show Kai throughout the Pizzaplex, but as time goes on, Tiger Rock tends to hold a little bit too tight onto Kai's arm. This is especially weird considering that Tiger Rock was staring intensely at Kai's arms as well whenever they first met each other. So all of this creeps Kai out and he runs away, causing Tiger Rock to think that they're playing hide and seek, and so he goes after him. Eventually though, Kai's time in the new attraction is up and he has to go home and leave. It is at this point we are introduced to more of Kai's everyday life stuff, such as his really good relationship with his family and his surprisingly wholesome relationship with his little sister. All of it making what's going to happen to him in the future all the more horrific. Anyways, as Kai continues throughout his days, a lot of really weird shit starts happening. Most of it really relating to him seeing shit that's either not supposed to be there or shit happening that's not meant to happen. All of this culminating to him getting attacked by his sister's plushies, which eventually lead to an even bigger reveal. Hey, all the stuff you just watched was all an illusion. You are actually still in that weird Pizzaplex attraction. The door to the room you are stuck in living this false reality has finally been pried open by a Pizzaplex employee, where he gets you out of there amongst a crowd of people who are just there staring at you, presumably because you were trapped in there literally all day, and by the time you get home you're like, yeah, fuck this, I'm not feeling too well, I'ma just go to bed. Only for Tiger Rock himself to appear through your window, rip your limbs off, and escape with them before you literally lose consciousness and bleed to death. Oh yeah, and did I mention Kai is only a 6th grader? This story literally ends with a pretty graphic description of a 6th grader fucking Terrifier style getting its limbs ripped off and bleeding to death. What the fuck? That is awesome. Just the way this book can so successfully get this kid, show some nice wholesome story about him with his family and having a nice relationship. He totally doesn't deserve anything bad to happen to him. Yet he still ends up having this very painful and disturbing fate to his character. I genuinely fucking love it. I love how Tales from the PIZZAPLEX as a whole doesn't give two shits on whether or not a character deserves to have this brutal death or fate, but they just have it anyways. Not only does it make it feel like you can't necessarily tell who's gonna survive or die by the end of the stories, but it also just, well, personally in my opinion, makes the deaths seem more impactful. For some reason, so many horror stories, especially slashers, always try to make these victims assholes or annoying. So in a weird way, they can somewhat justify the death that they have later on in the movie. It feels almost more satisfying and more deserved from the viewer's perspective. I've honestly never been too fond of this idea. I feel like in a horror story, whether the character's likable or not shouldn't really matter. If anything, if they are likable, then that just makes their death even more impactful. So I am so glad that Scott also doesn't seem to bother justifying a character's death or giving them a reason to die, because, you know, that's not how the world works. Not everyone who dies deserves it. Most of the time, just like in these stories, they are really just freak accidents, which really helps me appreciate a large majority of these stories overall. Yeah, I didn't like all of these stories, but there's no denying that lots of love and passion was put into each tale. Each tale from the PIZZAPLEX. I'm sorry, I had to. The opportunity was there. But thank you for watching. Make sure to hit that like button like your drunk dad hits your mom. And now, if you would be so kind as to check out this trailer for what I have been working on for over a year.
Killer clown sightings have exponentially increased across America.
You three immature assholes. You think you have what it takes to spend a full night at that hellhole?
My dick! Biscuits!
Jacob? Jacob?
Now, send in the clown. Clancy.
He longs for the days once filled with parties and play. If he finds you, he'll throw you a party, but don't be fooled, you're next on the menu.
The clown is real. He's real.
Many internet influencers have utilized this trend in hopes of gaining more followers. We advise everyone to be extra cautious when going around town at night.
Amazing Institute presents Clancy the Clown.
Long story short, I took a job I shouldn't have. They say the pretty ones will always get you killed, but he was so damn handsome I just couldn't resist.